The boundaries between Earth's oceanic plates are alive with seismic activity,
Banyak berpotensi tsunami.
ready to trigger one of the deadliest natural disasters known to man, a tsunami.
Jesus Christ, look at that.
When monster waves hit coastal populations,
Get in!
their power is unstoppable.
This earthquake and the tsunami is much larger than they had thought could be generated at that subduction zone.
Multiple assaults carry loved ones away,
We're hoping against hope that they're still alive somewhere.
inundating land for more than 3 miles.
Life has gone. The place has been destroyed.
And leaving a catastrophic death toll.
They'll still be finding bodies now, I would imagine. They would never have recovered everybody.
Around the world, humanity exists only moments from catastrophe. Disaster bubbles below the surface of the Earth, strikes from the heavens, or engulfs us from the sea. But we are not merely at the mercy of our planet. In our pursuit of industry, global connectivity, and reach for the stars, lives have been lost. Disasters reveal the best and worst of mankind, as one tragedy compounds another. How do these disasters occur? And what lessons can equip us when catastrophe strikes again? December 26th, 2004. Deep below the waves, off the western coast of Sumatra, the seafloor was ripped apart by a massive earthquake, measuring an average moment magnitude of 9.2.
That was one of the 10 largest earthquakes ever recorded, and it was the third largest since 1900.
This earthquake ruptured a huge fault. It was about 1,200 kilometers long, all the way up along the subduction zone in the Sumatra region.
As the fault unzipped directly opposite Aceh province, its capital was rocked by powerful tremors. The panicked residents of Banda Aceh flooded into the streets as their homes crumbled. But the worst was yet to come. Millions of people around the Indian Ocean were about to be overwhelmed by one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history. The earthquake violently shoved the seafloor upwards at a speed of 10,000 kilometers an hour.
This is one of the classic tsunami-generating earthquakes. They call it a subduction zone event, where two plates grind against each other, one's pushing the other one down, and then it essentially flips up and bang, that generates a wave.
A very large subduction zone earthquake might displace the water by 4 or 5 meters, which might not sound like all that much, but it's doing it over hundreds, if not 1,000 kilometers area. So it's a major disturbance to the ocean's surface, and that's a lot of energy.
The displaced energy transferred into the surrounding water, triggering a powerful wave.
And that wave, because it's in deep water, doesn't really have anything to slow it down. So it's going very fast. We're talking 800 kilometers an hour.
The tsunami sped toward the Aceh coastline. Those who could fled, but for many, it was too late. The torrents of water and rubble dragged thousands to their deaths and continued to surge inland.
It's not just one wave, it's multiple waves. And they're coming at a coastline with such force. And when they inundate or flood that area, they can travel up riverways, they can travel up other bodies of water.
And in particular, in the case of Banda Aceh, it actually came from two directions. It came from the west and also came around from the north. So there were accounts of people who ran one direction only to find that they were facing the tsunami coming from the other direction.
Comprised primarily of fishing communities, most of the immediate victims in Aceh were women and children.
A lot of the women and children were located close to the coast, so the children may have been in school, and the women may be at home or working in agriculture, and the men may have been out at sea, fishing.
Some of those fishermen may have been completely unaware of the horrors unfolding at home.
Bolak-balik tempat kejadian dan adanya lon balik ke dia ikut yana mayat tersangkut-sangkut.
A large tsunami in the open ocean might only be a couple of meters high and might even go unnoticed by ships at sea. But when it approaches shore, it undergoes a phenomenon called shoaling, where all the energy that's in that deep column of water gets compressed.
So you have what's a small wave in the deep ocean, about 50 centimeters, and then when it's coming on shore, in the case of 2004, probably about 5 meters high.
Some of the waves that hit the northern tip of Sumatra exceeded 30 meters, flattening the coast. However, the island was just the first in the firing line. The tsunami was speeding toward Thailand, where beach resorts across the south were packed with tourists enjoying an end-of-year vacation.
The tsunami travels about the speed of a jet plane. So if you imagine flying in a jet plane across an ocean basin, that's about the speed a tsunami travels.
Are you declaring an emergency, sir?
Watch all episodes of Ice Pilots. Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required. Download Veely now.
Although that's enough time for a proper warning system to deliver a warning to communities, it's not that much time.
Unaware of the cataclysmic rupture 500 kilometers away, holiday-goers at Patong Beach in Phuket witnessed a strange phenomenon. The sea was receding. As the tsunami approached, water was getting pulled back to feed the wave.
That wave is building up. The one behind is pushing like crazy. This wave is getting bigger and bigger. It's slowing down. That crest is growing. And then suddenly it turns around and starts coming back towards you, and it comes in so fast, you cannot outrun that.
An hour and a half after the earthquake was first registered, the tsunami hit Thailand, where tourists in Phuket bore witness to the wave.
I was fine. I knew I was high up. It was a good, strong building. The waves were rolling. I thought, yeah, it's fine, it's fine. Jesus Christ, look at that.
Jesus Christ!
It wasn't a wave. There was just solid water behind it, and it just kept coming. That wave is a good 15, 20 feet tall. Easy. Nothing was going to stop that wave.
It breaks a long way offshore, so you just have this roiling mass of hell, you know, up to about 5 meters high, zooming towards you, at about the speed of a 5,000 meter Olympic runner. So, can you outrun that?
Just hit, and there was devastation. Boats getting smashed everywhere, people being washed away, just carnage.
Water rushed into hotels, in some cases inundating the third floor.
Rooms filled up in 30 seconds. One of our friends had to throw the TV through the window to climb out. There's cars gone through shop windows, trucks being blown over.
The destructive power of the tsunami was unstoppable. Each cubic meter of water weighs a ton, and the waves from the Indian Ocean delivered 100,000 tons of water to each 1.5 meters of coastline.
The power is unbelievable. Just back there was a tractor, and it's nothing against the power of the wave.
The event is chaotic because a tsunami destroys everything. It doesn't pick and choose. It doesn't say, oh, I'll leave that house behind, or I'll leave that kid behind.
He was lost for 2 hours. The flood washed him away by himself. And he hung onto a door in the hotel until the water came down and came out 2 hours later.
Of the Thai areas hit, Khao Lak suffered the worst, with 4,000 perishing. But the tsunami would continue, sweeping across the Bay of Bengal. 2 hours after the earthquake, and 1,700 kilometers from the epicenter, Sri Lanka was next. Resorts near the coastal city of Matara were assaulted by waves.
It burst through the door, and we were lucky in other rooms it burst through the whole wall and just washed in, at which stage we just left everything and ran.
When Sri Lanka was hit, a railway train on the coastal line was crowded with passengers. At the village of Peralaya, the first of the gigantic waves arrived. The train stopped as water surged around it.
People felt that the train was going to be a safer place to be than to be on the ground. Not necessarily a very good choice.
නමුත් අර ඊළඟ වතුර පාර ලොකු වතුර පාරක් ඇතුළට ආවා ආපුවම මේකම එකපාරටම මේ කම්පාර්ට්මන්ට් එකේ පිල්ලා ගියා වතුරෙන් කෝච්චි එකපාරටම පොඩ්ඩක් මේ එක මේ මංගුවක් හැරුණා එක ඇන්ගල් එක කියන්නේ 90 degrees ඊට පස්සේ මම අර අතන මේ අල්ලගත්තා මේ අර වීදුරු ළඟ තියෙන පොඩි දැලක් වගේ එකක් මම ඒක අල්ලගෙන උඩ රැඳිලා හිටියා.
It's a bit like people being in a car when the tsunami comes. You know, a car's full of air, a train's full of air. It's easy to pick up and throw around, and that's exactly what it did, essentially. And probably in the region of about 1,500 people were drowned, crushed.
In terms of the death toll, it became the world's single worst train disaster, adding to a confirmed death toll of over 35,000 people. An estimated 90,000 buildings across Sri Lanka were destroyed.
The southeastern part of Sri Lanka and the south part were the worst hit, most definitely. You could see inundation going well over a kilometre inland. A lot of the tourist hotels on that part of the coast, you couldn't see them anymore. It was just a layer of rubble disappearing into the distance.
The seismic shock of the 2004 earthquake rang the Earth like a bell, causing the entire planet to vibrate by as much as a centimeter. It was recorded as a moment magnitude 9.2 event, a scale used by seismologists to compare the size of earthquakes.
Magnitude's a number that's logarithmic, and what that means is every time you step a magnitude unit, you're increasing the motion by about a factor of 10 and the energy by about a factor of 30.
Before the moment magnitude scale was developed in the 70s, we really relied on the amount of shaking that was observed in an earthquake to determine how big that earthquake is. But the moment magnitude scale is important because it relates to actual physical properties of the earthquake. It's proportional to the area of the fault that ruptured in that earthquake, and also the amount that fault moved in the earthquake.
The Sumatra quake was the third most powerful ever recorded. However, a tsunami triggering event in 1960 released almost 3 times the energy.
The most powerful earthquake ever recorded is a magnitude 9.5. It's called the Valdivia earthquake, which came in sort of southern central Chile.
On the 22nd of May, South America was throttled by a quake lasting over 10 minutes.
Rubble and ruin in the Pacific port of Concepcion in Chile, where she has suffered the worst series of earthquakes in all its history.
The problem with that event was that it was so big that it was outside anything that had happened before.
Waves up to 25 meters assaulted the Chilean coast.
There's a big debate as to how many people died in 1960 in Chile, anything between about 1,000 and 5,000 people, which is a huge range. Bearing in mind it was not a particularly well-populated coastline, that's a lot of the population, because they simply couldn't get away.
The tsunami waves would continue to propagate across the Pacific. Waves were recorded 10,000 kilometers from the epicenter, as far away as the Philippines.
It killed people in the United States. It killed over 100 people in Japan, 61 people in Hawaii. It inundated the coasts of New Zealand. It was a phenomenally big event.
As with the 2004 Sumatra tsunami, the Valdivia event was triggered by a megathrust earthquake.
Megathrust earthquakes occur on boundaries between oceanic plates and continental plates, where you have the oceanic plate subducting beneath the continental plate. And in this region, you can store a massive amount of energy over a large area.
That ocean plate that's diving into the Earth's mantle, it actually gets bent through quite a large angle. That causes huge stresses to build up within that plate.
When that stress is released, it does so violently.
So you get this movement of a huge fault at shallow depth beneath the ocean. And that's what causes a tsunami.
In 2004, the earthquake and resulting tsunami killed an estimated 230,000 people in 14 countries around the Indian Ocean. Part of the reason for the horrific death toll, people were not aware that a tsunami was coming and didn't expect one.
There was a real problem with education and preparedness in this case. So many of the people in that area weren't aware of tsunamis and didn't know to use the natural warning signs as a signal that they should evacuate.
A catastrophic tsunami wasn't expected in the region, even though there were warning signs.
There was evidence from geological studies of corals along the Sumatra coast, as well as historical accounts of large tsunamis. After investigating this, we did think that there was reason to have a warning system in the Indian Ocean, precisely because you could get these major events occurring there.
Early attempts were made to establish a warning system, but it was not felt as a priority.
It was going to take a while to get governments to pay attention to this when they had so much else to worry about in the Indian Ocean.
As the waters started to recede along coastal Thailand, the true scale of the devastation became clear. Nearly 8,500 people were injured in that country alone, many requiring severe medical attention.
I've gone by ambulance 6 hours the whole night, and now wait 10 hours and then 10 hours flight. I think then I will be really ill.
But among the havoc wreaked by the tsunami, there were those beyond the reach of emergency services.
When an earthquake happens, it can be devastating, but usually it's not such a huge area, and you have some idea of where the casualties are and where you need to rescue people. Whereas with the tsunami, they have these huge debris fields, and you have no idea where people might be either dead or alive.
Search and rescue crews combed debris, alongside volunteers and families searching for their loved ones. family members posted flyers with pictures and descriptions of those missing.
At this point, we're hoping against hope that they're still alive somewhere, hoping that they're not unconscious and can't speak or something like that.
But within days, the chances of finding people alive faded dramatically.
I think after 5 days, I think they died.
Bodies continued to wash up on beaches 3 days after the tsunami. Rescue teams turned into retrieval crews.
Bodies can be swept quite long distances. Bodies can be trapped in trees, in branches, in brush, and indeed can be located in places where you would not expect to find a body. So you will often get a situation where bodies are recovered perhaps weeks or months later in unusual places that were not subject to a detailed search at the time.
都是尸体啊哈，所以没有什么困难性。当然有一些被压住的哈，有的人被压住，树压住，啊，我们用锯的把它切开，然后它搬出来。
The dead were wrapped in tarps as workers sprayed chemicals to prevent the spread of disease. As the death toll climbed, the international impact of the disaster became clear.
Countries, let's say like Sweden, they had more people die from that event than any natural disaster they've had in their own country.
In Thailand, multinational forensic teams started the arduous process of identifying the deceased.
At this time, we have Australian team, German team, and French team. They can help us to identify all the foreigners.
It was a collection of 5,000 bodies in one place, all drowned, all black, all swollen, all looked the same. And you couldn't tell whether someone was from Africa or from Indonesia or from Thailand or from Sweden. They all looked the same.
Most of the people who die in this die from drowning, but also it's blunt force trauma. They get smashed. You get picked up by this thing, they get smashed into brick walls. A brick wall smashes into them because it's picked up by the tsunami.
คือจริงๆแล้วถ้าเผื่อเป็นฝรั่งนะฮะเป็นชาวต่างชาติเนี่ยมันจะมีพม่าด้วยนะฮะพม่าด้วยกะเหรี่ยงด้วยก็มีแล้วก็ฝรั่งด้วยอะไรก็คิดว่าประมาณใน 60%.
Initially, we were told we just need to separate the locals from the foreigners. The only time you could do that is if a particular local person had on a hotel uniform, for example, with a name tag or something that they belonged to a particular resort. So that was given up, and it was decided that all 5,000 bodies would be treated exactly the same. So every single person would have a forensic pathology examination, a forensic dental examination, a fingerprint examination. So the process started of one body at a time, doing those examination procedures. I couldn't even tell you how many dentists were on the ground at any one time, but it would have been 50 or 60, working out of a converted Buddhist temple.
With temperatures reaching 39 degrees Celsius, the waterlogged bodies were quickly decomposing.
And we had to convert this Buddhist temple into a makeshift mortuary with plywood walls and air conditioners.
Since the 2004 tsunami, authorities contacted over 4,000 relatives to come and receive bodies. However, not all could be identified.
There's probably 400 to 500 still unidentified bodies in shipping containers buried in the ground just north of Phuket to this day.
In Thailand, the tsunami killed around 5,400 people. But while the international media focused on tourists who perished in resorts, many locals were left to salvage the broken pieces of their lives.
มันหายไปหมดหายกับน้ำบ้านก็พังหมดพี่ก็ตายพี่สาวอย่างนี้ก็ตายบ้านก็พังหมดไม่เหลืออะไรทั้งนั้นนี่เสื้อนี่ก็แจกเมื่อวาน นี่ก็นอนนี่นอนอยู่มีลูกนอนอยู่นี่
It sometimes takes great tragedy to forge a new path ahead.
I think the tsunami really was a catalyst for change in the way that the international community responds to large-scale disasters like this one.
The United Nations mobilized and secured agreement to establish an Indian Ocean tsunami warning system.
When this earthquake occurred, it was clear that we needed to be able to respond quickly and accurately to large earthquakes. When you have an earthquake of 5.5 and larger, it's observed by instruments all around the world. The initial alerts for earthquakes can come out in 5 minutes, but it's important to get that information out as quickly as possible for tsunami warning, to give people a heads up of what happened.
This boat can save a lot of lives for the people living in Indian Ocean.
The new system, which became active in 2006, can provide those around the Indian Ocean with the kind of warning that may have saved lives in 2004. In the advent of an abnormal wave, sensors on the ocean floor register a change in ocean pressure. This information is transmitted to buoys on the surface. Then a satellite which passes the data onto a monitoring center for distribution. As well as sending warnings out to the public, officials, and the media, the centers will record data that can influence evacuation plans and save lives.
The warning centers can then start to look at some of the models that they've run before. And they have taken those models to all the different coastlines that will be affected and show how bad that wave will be inundating that coastline. So immediately you've got a lot more information about where to evacuate.
In terms of tsunami safety and education, no other country is more prepared than Japan. Nestled toward the top of the Pacific Ring of Fire, Japan is a volatile hub of seismic activity. Minor tremors are almost a daily occurrence across the islands, with around 1,500 earthquakes striking every year.
2,500 dead and missing is the toll of the earthquake and tidal wave that swept over a 200-mile stretch of shore along the northeast coast of Japan.
Residents are trained to respond to tsunamis and the earthquakes that cause them. The country even has an early warning system. Earthquakes emit two types of waves: primary waves, which cause weak tremors, and secondary waves, which cause the bulk of earthquake destruction. The faster-moving primary waves can travel up to 8 kilometers per second. Seismographs on the surface register this motion, triggering alerts which are sent to homes, offices, and schools, providing precautionary instructions for the oncoming secondary wave. A warning such as this was transmitted across Japan in early 2011. On the 11th of March, an undersea megathrust earthquake measuring a magnitude of 9.0 struck 130 kilometers east of Sendai. It was the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in Japan. 373 kilometers from the epicenter, citizens of Tokyo received a minute's warning before skyscrapers began to sway. The earthquake was so intense, it shortened the length of the 24-hour day by 1.8 microseconds.
押さえたのさ、手で2つ。ところがこうなって曲げるんだよね。こいつ曲げてこうなってよ。 しあれの下になったんだ俺ロッカーのだけどちょうど机やったために上さ机さこう倒れてながらこの隙間間から助かった
The main rupture occurred over an area of only about 400 kilometers, and it had a huge amount of slip relative to previous earthquakes.
In the 2004 Sumatra earthquake, the maximum amount of relative displacement was around 20 meters.
The Japan earthquake caused 70 meters or more slip over that relatively small area. And because that slip happened right at the shallow part of the earthquake fault, it was very effective in generating a large tsunami.
地震とより大こう収まった時その時ここから船に走っていってそして船を大きさ出したの津波来るんじゃねえかなと思ったから
A Japanese Coast Guard patrol ship was one of the first to encounter the tsunami a few kilometers offshore. The wave continued toward the northeastern coast of Japan, where people were bracing for the impact.
Japan is the most tsunami-prepared country in the world. Was it prepared for the 2011? No. They had done modelling and they had inundation maps and they had evacuation centres. They had evacuation routes where you should go. Fundamental mistake they made was they didn't think there could be an event that big.
The initial warnings that went out talked about a wave smaller than the wave that was actually coming. Part of the problem was people not understanding what those wave heights were going to be, how far they had to go to be safe, and how quickly they had to do it. And in many cases, they had very little time.
Many of the tsunami shields offered little protection.
There are some places along the Tohoku coast where massive tsunami barriers have been constructed, and those were designed to prevent a tsunami of the maximum that was expected.
In some cases, the barriers failed completely.
And so those seawalls essentially became material for the tsunami to move around. They then became battering rams.
In Miyako City, tsunami waves reached run-up heights of 39 meters, as narrow bays focused the onslaught of water.
When a tsunami enters human population areas, the first thing it's going to do is essentially go along what is the path of least resistance, so it'll go up the rivers and it'll go down the streets.
Across coastal centers, people clambered atop buildings, hoping their structures could withstand the oncoming torrents.
When it comes across a building or something like that, it'll build up on that, just like when you see with a river in flood, it's flowing down, it's piling up and piling up and piling up, and if it has enough energy, that building falls over and it's gone. In the case of a tsunami, it is an incessant, continuing surge of water coming in, and it's picked up an awful lot of stuff to bring with it.
Desperate survivors in Kameishi watched as cars and fishing boats assaulted their places of refuge. Barely an hour after the initial quake, waves were surging over the Sendai Plains, 2 kilometers inland. Cars racing from the onslaught could barely move faster than the oncoming debris. In some places, the tsunami bore inland more than 5 kilometers, leaving a trail of utter devastation.
Starts off with total destruction, and as that starts to decrease, it starts to leave behind the stuff that it picked up as it started to move inland.
Across the world's most tsunami-prepared country, an area of approximately 560 square kilometers was inundated.
It's his house. Here.
Even people in some evacuation centers died, and they'd done the right thing.
Among the areas affected, at least 101 designated tsunami evacuation sites were hit.
この度の東北地方太平洋沖地震はマグニチュード 9.0 という例を見ない規模の巨大地震であり、被災地の悲惨な状況に深く心を痛めています。
The Tohoku earthquake shifted Japan's main island of Honshu, 2.4 meters east. As the confirmed death toll began to climb, those unaffected prayed that lost ones would return.
はい、無事でした。なんとか、みんな親戚もみんな亡くなって、友達も。
45,700 buildings were destroyed, and 144,000 were damaged. Towns were transformed into unrecognizable rubble.
姉さんたちはしばらくて来れないから、私は今そこいらなんですよ、実家がね。
Sendai was in the direct firing line of both the earthquake and the tsunami. Days after the waves, industrial complexes still burned, fueled by ruptured oil storage tanks and liquefied natural gas stockpiled at the port. Over 4 million homes across Japan were left without electricity. In heavily affected areas, survivors searched in vain for missing relatives. International emergency crews combed through wreckage, marking empty structures with an X if they failed to find bodies inside.
And the idea is to slowly progress through all the buildings and vehicles to make sure there's no persons missing in them.
The earthquake and tsunami claimed over 15,800 lives. More than 2,500 on top of that were recorded missing. Amongst the severe pain and loss, there were a few stories of hope, as lucky families were reunited.
山回って来たんですよ。そしたらもう水もなければ、帰ってきたら水もなければ、もう全部バラバラになってしまって、今ようやく再開して、無事だっていうことで、子供たちだったら別だって、おばあさんが流されて一回あばらなんか打って入院してるって、ただ奥さんがいないっていうことで今再開したんですけど。
帰ってる時に津波が来ちゃったんで、ずっと探してて、次の日から奇跡だと思います。
Scars left by the tsunami would take years to heal. However, the waves brought further destruction on the 11th of March. Some of the areas worst hit were about to bear the brunt of what was fast becoming a rolling disaster.
津波よりも一番怖いのは原子力なんですよね。
On the day of the tsunami, just 66 kilometers from Sendai, several thousand people were being ordered to evacuate. Multiple reactors at the Fukushima Daiichi power plant were going into meltdown.
there was a lack of understanding on the part of Tokyo Power and its regulators about the vulnerabilities associated with the plant.
The TEPCO plant had survived the earthquake, and the tsunami warning system had shut down the reactors, switching power for the cooling mechanisms to the backup diesel generators. But the generators were rendered inoperable as the waves swept over the 5.6-meter tsunami barrier.
Fukushima had a seawall. It just wasn't big enough. Simple as that. And again, this comes back to the fact that they were prepared for an event that was smaller.
In the case of the Fukushima reactor, the tsunami knocked out the auxiliary power supply, and so the reactor was not able to shut down and ended up, going into meltdown.
A total of 3 reactors at the plant started overheating. Pressurized hydrogen gas, building up in 2 of the containment buildings, caused a series of explosions. Radioactive material was now leaking from the plant. Workers toiled to cool the reactors with water cannons, and seawater dropped from helicopters. At the end of March, the evacuation zone expanded to 30 kilometers around the plant. Fractures in the plant's trenches and tunnels caused radiation to leak into the ocean. Close to the plant, levels of radioactive iodine-131 were measured at 7.5 million times the legal limit. The appearance of increased levels of radiation in some local food and water supplies prompted Japanese and international officials to issue consumption warnings.
だけど今後、今汚染された野菜、牛乳とかが出てきたって報道がもっと出てくれば飲まないかもしれませんし、本当に今日も雨ちょっと怖くって濡れたら大丈夫かなって、濡れても大丈夫かなっていう不安は。
Lines stretched for blocks as parts of the country experienced food and water shortages for the first time since the Second World War. Farmers across Japan struggled as demand for their produce dropped, even in areas unaffected by the crisis.
これからね、風評被害とかそういうの多分あるかと思うんですよね。で、私ら農業やってますから、でそういう面で本当にこれからやっていけるのかななんていう心配あります。
Across the exclusion zone, crops and livestock were abandoned and left to die.
放射能が、自分の希望ですけども、大量の海水で中和されて、薄くなって、早く消えてくれればいいなと思っています。
In Sendai, the fishing industry collapsed, leaving many communities, already devastated by the waves, to grapple with radioactive emissions. On the 7th anniversary of the disaster, TEPCO revealed that it had reduced the rate of contaminated water reaching the reactors from 400 tons per day to 100.
前から比べればだいぶ環境も良くなって、安定してきてるというか、そういうふうに見えるんですけど、ただ、まだまだ先は長いと思うんで、今のところは今後どうなるかっていうのははっきり分かりません。
1 million tons of radioactive water still sits at the site, waiting for authorities to determine how to dispose of it. The Fukushima incident was the worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl in 1986. A parliament-appointed investigation committee concluded that the disaster was man-made, the result of collusion between the government, regulators, and the operator of the plant, Tokyo Electric Power Company.
初歩的なこともできないような会社が原発を創業してたっていうことに怒りを感じて、直ちに電力会社を 引きずり下ろしたいみたいな気持ちで、それでここに参加しました。
There was a reluctance on the part of the utility to address tsunami safety, in part because this seemed to be such a low probability event that its likelihood was discounted.
もちろんその作業というのは10年をはるかに超えて30年そんなことまで言われるような長い作業になってまいります。
Today, areas closest to the plant stand frozen in time as people fear to return to some sectors that the government has deemed safe. Japan will continue to carry the horror of the Tohoku tsunami for decades to come, but it has the wealth and facilities to slowly heal. For those in less economically stable areas, recovery is not always so certain. The 2004 tsunami ravished some communities around the Indian Ocean so badly that many would never be the same. Apart from the loss of life, the environmental and economic impact was enormous, requiring global assistance to rebuild. Rallying together, the international community donated $14 billion in aid across affected countries. In the 5 years following the tsunami, the International Federation of Red Cross Societies alone provided nearly 5 million people with assistance, rebuilding 51,000 new houses and restoring nearly 300 hospitals and clinics.
One of the issues also in the Indian tsunami was the state of the coastal mangroves and other ecosystems that were degraded. And so there was an effort to restore and to plant more mangrove forests around the coasts.
ผมไม่เคยคิดเห็นความสำคัญของป่าเลย ไปเข้าในป่าก็ตัดโค่นสบายเลย แต่พอหลังเกิดสึนามิเนี่ย มันทำให้คิดว่าปลุกจิตสำนึกถ้าว่ามีป่าอุดมสมบูรณ์แล้ว
Revitalized mangroves create a buffer between communities and any coastal hazards.
There's now a big drive from many organizations to promote nature-based solutions or ecosystem-based approaches because it creates a lot of benefits, not only in terms of risk reduction, but also in terms of livelihoods and sustainability.
We like to empowering the people to look after their environment by themselves.
To effectively grow back communities, experts require a comprehensive picture of the destructive potential of seismically triggered waves. The first accounts of a tsunami date over 4,000 years ago. But in the last 2 decades, we've experienced 2 events unprecedented in scale.
We can't predict exactly how big and where an earthquake will be, but we can predict regions that are potentially closer to having a very large earthquake.
Earthquake-prone coastal areas need to look to recent tragedies and prepare for the inevitability of the next tsunami. While the Indian Ocean and Tohoku tsunamis left trails of disaster, they also provided data that could one day save lives.
We could trace the entire inundation of this tsunami all the way through, 5 kilometers inland. We can now say to you, okay, once every X number of years, you're going to get a wave this big coming through.
We can only hope that we are better prepared when disaster strikes from the sea once more.